Hello and welcome to this edition of Global Voices of Accessible Travel. I am your host, Laurent, the co-founder of Tapooz Travel. We are an inclusive travel company based in the San Francisco Bay Area of California. We specialize in organizing accessible trips in the US, Canada, and selected destinations worldwide. Well, we are now almost mid-September, and for this edition, we're going to stay close to home in the Bay Area. Our guest today is our friend, colleague, and neighbor, Bonnie Lewkowicz. For many of our viewers, Bonnie needs no introduction. She is one of the most prominent voices advocating for and educating about access to outdoor recreation and tourism for people with disabilities. I'll have Bonnie's bio at the end of the interview. Bonnie was the founder and director of Access Northern California when she authored a number of regional access guides for California and the Bay Area. She is currently a manager at BORP, the Bay Area Outreach and Recreation Program. She also consults with entities such as the National Park Service, Amtrak, and overall actors in the hospitality industry. Bonnie is an avid world traveler, and we had the immense pleasure of taking her on a tour of Portugal just a few years ago. And just in case you're not impressed yet, Bonnie is one of the founders of Access Dance Company, an internationally renowned, physically integrated, contemporary dance company based in Oakland, California. So, without further ado, let's go and meet Bonnie. Bonnie, good morning. How are you? It's good to see you this morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's one of those rare occasions when actually I speak to somebody which is not very close to me. We are literally neighbors, just a couple of streets away. For people that have the misfortune not to know you yet, can you introduce yourself? Talk a little bit about yourself, and then we'll move into the conversation about accessible travel.
Sure, but before I do that, do you realize, Laurent, 3 years ago today we were in Portugal?
Oh my God, that's why I'm getting all those pictures from Ica on my cell phone. Remember this? Remember that? Yeah, that was an incredible trip. And maybe we can talk about it later in the interview. I think people will be interested to know what happened in Portugal. Yes. But go ahead, tell people who you are and maybe talk a little bit about locally what you're doing.
Okay, great. Well, I have a long history of working in tourism. I started my career in recreation therapy, doing outdoor recreation for people with disabilities, with a program that I coincidentally am now back working at currently. And while I was at that program, I started collecting a lot of data about travel and noticed that people wanted to travel. And we're talking a long time ago. This was like 35 plus years ago. And so I moved on to a different career.
But you're only 35 years old, so what's going on?
I started young. I then became a travel agent and specialized in what we called at the time accessible tourism. This was pre-internet days. So anytime I had to book a hotel, I had to use this gigantic hotel book. It's called the Hotel Index. So it's quite challenging, and it was very stressful sending people to places that I had never been. I use a wheelchair and like to travel a lot, so I could talk about the places I had been to, but not the places that I hadn't been to. And after doing that for about 7 years, I decided that my own backyard was a big tourist destination. We're in the Berkeley, San Francisco Bay Area, California, and if I stuck to my own backyard, I would be able to physically be able to go look at places to verify accessibility. And so I started my own nonprofit, Access Northern California, that was actually almost 19 years ago, and really focused on hotels, lodging, and worked a lot with the San Francisco, at the time, Convention and Visitors Bureau, and produced 4 access guides to San Francisco. Moved on from the tourism industry to work more in outdoor recreation, and have written some guides to accessible trails in the San Francisco Bay Area, and 2 websites specifically about parks and trails. along California's coast. And with the current Access Northern California website, I know there's a lot of information that gets confusing. I also include what I call alternative lodging. So places that are camping, yurts, cabins, pretty much anything but hotels. And that's currently what I've been doing, as well as my travel.
That's great, and to boot, the picture that we've chosen for virtual background is so apropos, so on point. This is you entering a kayak, which people know me as a fanatic kayaker. So this is great. BORP, the group that you've mentioned, and you are now active, back to being very active with. Can you describe a little bit what BORP does in the Bay Area and how they've been affected by the pandemic in their activities?
Yes, so BORP, as it's commonly known, was started, more than 40 years ago by some UC Berkeley students that didn't have access to recreation. And they started with a wheelchair basketball class. And it has since grown into a internationally renowned program, especially for our hand cycling program, which is the largest in the country, if not the world. We have over 100 adaptive bikes. So we do a vast array of programming that's directed towards people with physical disabilities primarily. And it is to empower people to get out there and recreation and stay fit and healthy. And so the programs are, we have a very large youth program that focuses on competition, wheelchair basketball, track and field. Excuse me. A lot of the students have gone on to get sports scholarships at major universities, so that's really exciting. Excuse me for 1 second.
Sure.
We also have a outings and adventure program that is led by a woman that is blind and also uses a wheelchair. And I'll talk about how she's transitioned that program during the pandemic. And we have our cycling program. And then we have a fitness center, an actual little fitness studio. And we have a variety of different classes that we offer. Before the pandemic, they were in studio. And now we've transitioned to online fitness classes.
Interesting. Oh,
Yeah.
I definitely want to hear about that. That is interesting.
It was a very easy transition in some regards because prior to the pandemic, so back in last summer, we were talking about how to increase participation in our classes. And I had suggested that getting to the studio is problematic for some people, even though we're right on a major, BART route or, underground transportation and public transportation right to the center. Trying to find the right time of day that worked for working people as well as non-working people. So I had approached the director and said, why don't we look into doing some online classes, either on demand, where people could do it at their own time, or live, where people would, have to come in at a certain time, but they wouldn't have to leave their home. And so we got a grant to look into that and did some research and found out what was currently out there. And so that was done in last October. We did that. And so when the pandemic hit in February and we had to basically shut everything down, within 2 weeks, we were up and ready with online classes. And it's proven to be hugely popular. We're getting way more attendance than we did when we had in-person classes. And, I would say that's one thing, if there's such a thing as a silver lining in all of this, is that people with disabilities have access to more fitness opportunities and other kinds of opportunities because of it being online and being able to do it right from your home.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. I mean, that certainly talks volume about the spirit of BORP and the can-do attitude that this organization has and continue to have. I'm going to plug somebody here that, it's a friend of common friends that we have, because you talked about the bicycling program, which is an incredible program. Greg Milano, a good friend and a fellow kayaker, took, I think, the BORP concept, and now he's exporting, if you will, that bicycling BORP concept overseas. And I hope to have the opportunity to get him on a program and interview him at some point. But how do you? I know you are a fanatic bicycler, as I am a kayaker. Do you miss it? And then how are you getting out on your bicycle in this era of pandemic?
Well, yes, that was one of our first programs to open up. And what's unique about our bike program is that it's drop-in. So it's not that you have to go on a group ride at a certain time, which a lot of the cycling programs around the country have that. So Greg started that, and that's been great. So, we're still only open certain days of the week, but you can come from like 9 to 5 when it's convenient for you and have access to the bikes. So back in June, we opened up the cycling center and just, followed all the protocols. We didn't have more than 2 people. It's an outdoor, activity. We wiped down the bikes after each use, and people had to make a reservation. And we took people's temperature as they came in, although that's proving not to be all that valuable. Right. And so I have been able to get out. However, with our current situation with the fires and the bad air quality, I haven't been able to. And I can also say too that I just emailed Greg before we started this conversation, because I'm on the board of the Inclusive Cycling International program that he started. And I know we're raring to go with that. And the little bit that we've been able to do in South America and Africa, those programs are still going, and anxious to start more.
That's wonderful. I mean, I love the stories when you start something, locally and it grows organically, and you get all the feedback and interest, and then you take the same idea, the principle, and what works, and you expand it nationally and overseas. It's a great story, and I know Greg is going to do just tremendously well with this program globally. It's needed, and it's a great concept, and I'm sure it's going to be tremendous. You mentioned, of course, your work, your early work that continues today about being the author and editor of those guides, Northern California and so forth. Talking about that, do you see an evolution coming from the county, the state, the national parks, the way they look at accessibility in their parks and so forth? Did you see an evolution over the years? Does it get better?
Yes, the situation has definitely improved, and I think in part because of some of the legal requirements that are on the books now. It was the situation, when the laws first came on, that it relied on disability advocates to kind of make sure that the parks were doing what they were supposed to be doing. And there were numerous lawsuits that resulted of it. But I think, especially now with what's going on in our world, there is this recognition of inclusion that hasn't been happening for a lot of the various aspects of the population. And people with disabilities is part of that, that haven't typically been included. And so I think there's much more attention being paid to that. And I know I myself, sitting on different advisory panels and conferences now and giving, presentations about inclusion. And I think it's gone from, I think the physical part of it has been pretty good and ongoing for a long time. The piece that's missing is the programmatic aspect of accessibility. And it's kind of a harder concept to grasp, but there's more educating that needs to happen around that.
Right. You know, if I may open a parenthesis here, this is it's a little bit outside of the travel or tourism, but talking about the terms that we use within our community and when we need to communicate ideas or convey a message to people that are outside of our immediate community but have an interest in what we do. We move from terms like disability to accessibility, and now you just use the word inclusion. You want to talk about that a little bit? I think this is something that will resonate a lot with our global audience.
Right. And the other term that I think is changing, or at least I change it when I use it or hear it used, is universal design.
Yeah.
And I like to say now inclusive design because, excuse me, there isn't such a thing as universal design. Nothing is ever going to be for all people. But if you start thinking that way, that, well, you know, how can we make it best fit for all people? Then you're being more inclusive. You know, when I first started in this industry, we called it accessible tourism, like I said. And I think there's also an image, at least I get that when I think of the word accessible again, I go to physical accessibility. And there's so much more to accessibility than just, you know, wide doorways and ramps. It's also about the attitudes of people. You know, you can go to the most accessible place physically, but if you don't feel welcome, that access is kind of useless because you won't return. I know, at least I won't, and I have had that happen. So I think calling it inclusive is just a way of signifying that you've really thought about what you're doing and how you're making your program work for everyone.
Absolutely, absolutely. I know, not wanting to necessarily plug my own company, but the way we describe what we do, not Global Voices, my travel company, is travel for people of all abilities, friends and families. So that by definition, we try to insert the concept of inclusiveness in everything that we do. And since you mentioned Portugal earlier in the conversation, you may remember, I think it was in Nazaré, one of the places we visited, and there was a sign on the entrance of a certain site. So yes, they did have, you know, the icon of the person on the wheelchair, and next to it there was a pregnant woman, you know, with the icon of a woman with a belly, and next to it there was a small child, and next to it there was an elderly person. Some, you know, some entities are thinking in that way to think about inclusiveness. When a pregnant woman will need as much access, you know, physical access, or feeling welcome as a person in a wheelchair and so forth. So that's, I think that's a great concept. I hope this is something that slowly will make its way into the mainstream and the way we use that as a term to explain and to convey what we do. So thank you for that.
And you know, Laurent, too, my whole career, I have kind of stayed away from identifying things as accessible. So for example, when I post on my website, I don't call it an accessible trail. I just provide the kinds of information that people might need in order for them to make that determination about whether it's accessible to them or not.
Yeah.
You know, I know people want ratings. They want, you know, like all trails, you know, easy, hard, difficult. I've just really kind of tried to stay away from that kind of rating, but I know some people do want that, and it works for some people.
Right, right. Interesting. No, the it's the human nature, and then certainly when you look at taking a trip or booking a hotel or whatever, you certainly look at the ratings, because you want to see what other people think. You want to see what an authority like you think about a certain place. It's just an easy way to identify, you know, at least the first hurdle. Is that even okay for me to continue looking into it? from my perspective, it never ends there. That's a given. You know, you were talking about the difficulties once upon a time to book a hotel room with your book and fax machine. Remember fax machines? I can tell you that even today, with all the technology and the internet and the enormous amount of data that we have on properties and sites and so forth, still very often it comes down to the granular level of some detail that either is there or it's not there, and that will make the difference between am I able to enjoy this experience or I'm not able to enjoy this experience. So it's not an easy situation, but I think the technology today is going to enable us to move into that direction. But we need to have a common language. And you know, going back to the issue of inclusiveness, it is, you know, it's a great term. It's kind of it's conceptually, it's a great idea. But obviously, when we communicate with the people that we want them to be our providers of services or sites or trails, we need to make sure that there's an understanding of what it means. So now it goes back to the details of auditing, reviewing trails and hotel rooms. But it's not an easy issue. But hopefully the technology will enable us to get there.
Well, and I think too, there's a consumer responsibility to ask the right questions or ask the questions that they need answers to. I kind of look at when someone says something is accessible, I kind of look at it as kind of like the street light. It's a green light, you know, which means go. I think of it more as a yellow light. It means, okay, I can ask a little more, you know, questions and then I can go. So I don't take accessible, when something is identified as accessible, I don't necessarily think that it's going to work, you know, great for me.
But you're not the typical traveler. Let me say that. I mean, this is your life. This is your mission. This is your experience. You're not typical. Most of the people, they don't even know what question to ask.
Yeah.
I see that in my own business when I'm dealing with new guests that want to travel with us. You know, we go through at least an hour of just exchange. So I have an understanding of how much they don't know and the question they should ask from us, so we can make sure to find the best solutions for them. So again, this is an ongoing conversation. The more information we have, the presentation of the information is critical, how you present information. So it's so easy to be completely confused by how much information there is out there, and then try to pick up the stuff that you actually need and is critical to you. But it's getting better. I mean, from the book that you mentioned, the fax machines, you know, today in the palm of your hand, you can have almost everything that you need. So it is going better. I would like just to touch very quickly on the issue of national parks, if you can touch on that, because we see a lot of interest now for you know, road trips are always kind of sort of popular, but not as much as I want to go to San Francisco or New York and spend a whole 7-10 days for the full experience. We see a lot more, partly because of the pandemic, a desire to do road trips, to travel on the road with a self-contained, secure bubble of friends and family, you know, with a minivan and whatever. So national parks or even state parks are a natural destination for this type of travel. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And yeah, like you mentioned, people feel safe going to parks because they're outdoors. And there has been vast improvements here in the United States, creating access. You know, some of our largest parks like Yosemite and Yellowstone, which I was recently at.
Oh, that's right. I want to hear about that a little bit. Yes.
Yeah, fabulous. You know, the downside is that as they become more accessible, more people go. And, you know, why do people go to parks is to kind of escape, to look at the natural beauty around you. And you kind of want to do that, you know, on your own, not with mobs of people around you. So national parks are starting to limit the number of people that can come into the parks at any given time, you know, to make sure that the resources stay available to people. So they, most websites you can go to for the national parks and find out about the accessibility. Several of the big national parks have access guides that you can get at the visitor center. One part, it's not a national park, but recently saw where one national park has a large all-terrain motorized type vehicle, well, they call it a wheelchair, that could get you onto the sand dunes that someone could loan for free at the visitor center. This was in Michigan, my home state. And so I think more parks are going that way. And I have been working with a company that does wheelchairs, and they call it their off-road wheelchair. And they've been having some success talking to parks to have these chairs available. So, you know, someone that doesn't show up with their own wheelchair but could use one, or someone that just has, you know, an everyday chair and is not going to be able to get across rough terrain could use one. So we're seeing, you know, that happen in locations. Again, it comes down to the advocacy, I think.
Sure.
The disabled community requesting that, and then it happens.
Sounds like a lot of fun. I recently went up the Oregon coast. Actually, just 2 weeks ago, we missed the fires, thankfully, and we stopped by the dunes, the National Dunes Park. It's 40 miles long, 40 miles long of dunes like the Sahara. It's incredible, and it is by the coast. Something completely unique and completely inaccessible. There's no way anybody, even with, you know, a small mobility limitation, will able to even enjoy that place. There is only one place that has some kind of an overlook that has a ramp, granted, that you can kind of look from far and say, oh my God, this is beautiful. How do I get there? So yeah, there is still a long way away to go, but definitely getting better.
Well, if I could say too then, and I think because of technology and the advances that are being made with the type of equipment that people are getting, that parks need to start thinking about, oh, you know, someone in a wheelchair could use this trail even though there's rocks and it's steep, and so maybe we should build that accessible bathroom at the top of that mountain. So I think they're going to have to start thinking about the possibilities and not the limitations.
Sure, no, absolutely. I mean, there are solutions. You just need the will, the budget sometimes, and certainly the push from the community. You may remember Año Nuevo here in California, this beautiful place down south. You know what I'm talking about, where Año Nuevo Park, where we have the sea lion colony. Right. So, you know, you have to go through, I don't know, maybe a mile of dunes before you get to the seashore to watch the sea lions. And once upon a time, it was just impossible to get there. And then a few years ago, they put this beautiful wood or simile wood boardwalk that you can just walk and roll all the way from the parking lot to watch the seals. I mean, if you can do that in the middle of sand dunes, you can do that just about anywhere. But that's yeah, and it came from I think from an awareness of the state authority. It's a state park that they need to make sure that all of Californians can enjoy this place. You mentioned that the national parks are. I'm sorry.
If I could just say one thing about that too, is that when, you know, access gets put into these places, they need to have a budget for maintenance so that the access remains free and clear of all that sand. Because I've been to a fabulous switchback boardwalk that goes down to the beach through dunes, but half the time you can't use it because there's so much sand on it because they don't have a budget to keep it clear. So I think that's an aspect of accessibility that gets overlooked.
Now that you mentioned that, you're right. I now remember that the people that took us through that boardwalk and were responsible to maintain are all volunteers. They all volunteer for that. There was no state person, you know, on the salary. It was all volunteers and docents, naturalists that were doing it. But in a way, why not? I mean, if we can find a way to have the community involved with the state and so forth, I think that's even a better way to going back to
Yes.
going back to the principle of inclusiveness. That's even
Right.
even better if we can find a way to codify and make it work. Just a quick question before we move on to the next topic. You mentioned the national parks are now kind of issuing tickets to get into the national parks, limiting the number of people. Do we get preferential priority? People wheelchair, do they get any? No, that's
That I'm aware of, no, you have just as much chance to, you know, as the lottery as anyone else to be able to access it. Now it may be different if you're doing lodging in an overnight, you know, in a national park that has lodging in it.
mhm.
In theory, they're supposed to sell the accessible rooms last. So in that regard, you would have, you know, maybe a better chance at getting into the
Sure,
park.
sure.
But I also want to mention too that there is a national park discount pass available for people with disabilities, but it's only for US residents.
I
So
see.
doesn't apply to international travelers.
You know, I'm shaking my head. Don't tell anybody, but actually, in numerous occasions last year, I bought passes for visitors from overseas, and that was just the only way they could actually enjoy, you know, traveling with 2 or 3 vans into the Southwest. You need to have that pass, you know. So don't tell anybody. We coming up on a half hour, so I want to now to expand the conversation on the global scene. So you mentioned Portugal earlier. Maybe a few words about what you remember and from an inclusiveness, you know, looking back and maybe a few words. And then if you want to talk about your assessment as a person that, you know, you're living and breathing travel. Maybe your assessment of where are we going with this? You know, what is the future post-pandemic for travel?
I'm still waiting for the jet packs, but oh, Portugal, very fond memories of Portugal. We saw a lot in a little bit of time, which was great. And, you know, whenever I travel, my big emphasis is, you know, things that I can do outdoors. So I loved being outdoors in Portugal, except when I was on the cobblestones. Cobblestones and motorized wheelchairs are good companions, but they in many places had is it a Swedish chair? I don't remember that. It's a motorized chair that you could get into.
It's a Swiss. It's called Swiss track. Yeah, it's kind of a yeah.
I mean, I was so amazed that I was able to get up in this castle, which of course the one that was outside of oh, I can't think of any names now, where Madonna bought a house.
Sintra, just
Sintra.
outside Sintra, the Moorish castle, yes.
The Moorish castle. I actually had tears in my eyes when I was up, you know, at the very top. Well, not the very top, but pretty close to the top, and looking down on the city and being there with everyone else. It's like, wow, how is this happening? And they made it happen, and it was fantastic. So thank you, Portugal.
I think it's going back to what you mentioned earlier about again the concept of inclusiveness, and that's my experience with Portugal. I think the attitude of the people is very largely was, you know, part of the success of the trip, the experience that you had. The attitude of the people, the willingness to really put in the effort, not just to have the Swiss track and the appropriate equipment, but the overall attitude, being there, you know, physically with this joy and not just ready to help, you know, really ready to do just about anything to make sure that we all get the experience that we deserve.
And I tell people that, yes, in the US, we have these accessibility laws, but in most of the rest of the world, it's people that make the access.
Yeah.
And that as, you know, as a traveler coming from the US where you have a certain idea and expectation about accessibility, I tell people, if you want to have a good experience, do away with that attitude, and recognize that access in a lot of other places doesn't mean that you can do it independently. It might mean someone else has to help you up a step, but you're getting there. And so I think a lot of it comes down to expectations and just being able to go with it and, you know, make it happen. Yeah.
Absolutely. In a few words, Bonnie, what is the world for us? You know, post-pandemic, we'll have a vaccine eventually with all the political and all that nonsense. But you know, maybe a year from today, we'll have a vaccine. It will be safe or safer to travel again. Where do you think we're going to be with inclusive travel?
Well, where are we going to be? I think, excuse me, there'll be, because of our aging population, and according to statistics, that's the population that has the money to travel. I think that we will see more and more things geared towards people with disabilities. And it'll only get better from here. You know, I don't see us going backwards. I see that, at least here in the States, more of the organizations like the visitors bureaus that bring tourism into that particular city are kind of embracing more this idea of inclusion, and starting to have information on their websites available. You know, I think there's a recognition that it used to be that there was this push that become accessible because it's the right thing to do. And now there's more of a recognition that not only is it the right thing to do, it's good for business.
Exactly.
And
Absolutely.
there's a lot of people out there that want to come here. This is a market. And I think a time now when everyone is scrambling to get new people in and, you know, develop a market, I think it can only improve from here.
Right.
I'm hopeful.
No, that sounds great. You know, we all hopeful. You know, again, you and I, we kind of, this is our daily, we breathe everything that's happening in this industry. I gotta tell you, I see very positive trends that really, I'm very excited by certain things. And I'm kind of aware that some things that we were used to are going to disappear or be marginalized. I have nothing personal against cruises, you know, the cruise industry, but it's a big question mark whether or not cruises are going to come back in the way that they were before. A lot of conversation that I have with a lot of clients that were big cruise takers, it's Dover, where it's so, and you know, the airline industries, you know, we are going to go through some consolidation, and maybe it's time because of that to get back to, can I please have an accessible bathroom in this damn plane? I mean, the fact we're still talking about it in 2020, it's unbelievable. So, long story short, you know, the pandemic is horrendous, but it may open up some new thinking and some new avenues for the future. But yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, one thing I've seen that is making a rebound, and I think will do very well, is Airbnb, because people want to stay they don't want to stay at the big hotels. You know, that will probably change over time, especially as the vaccine comes on. But I have a neighbor, and you know them, their Airbnb is booked constantly. I mean, throughout this whole pandemic, it has been. So I see that. And I just learned of a company in Oregon that's building these accessible pods that could be an Airbnb. And I was like, yes, get them up here. Anyway, I think there's growth for sure.
There is this on my own personal sphere of interest, accessible RVs. Oh my God, about time. That's a project. We've been talking about that, you and I, now for like 8 years. where are those damn accessible RVs? Why can't I just rent an accessible RV so I can go on a road trip like everybody else? It's coming. My own personal commitment to you. I'm working on it. Buddy, it's such a pleasure to talk to you. I want to make it kind of a regular event. If you are able to that, maybe we can get back together every so often and shoot the breeze, you know, speedball about what's going on in the world of inclusive tourism, and it will be done.
Would love that.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You do the same, and happy to answer any questions that people have.
Thank you. We'll talk soon again.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye, Bonnie.